This is Young Onset Parkinson's Network. We believe young onset Parkinson's disease does not define you. You define it. We are a safe place to learn, connect, and engage within a supportive community that actually gets it, because we've got it too. Live your best life and thrive far beyond diagnosis. Welcome to Young Onset Parkinson's Network. Living well starts here.
Hey, it's Mel, and this is the YOPN Living Well Starts Here podcast. And today we're speaking with Drs. Okun and Dorsey, who recently released the New York Times bestselling book, The Parkinson's Plan. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You guys have been following my social media for a while, and I'm like, oh, I'm official. So it's very exciting for us. And the book has started an amazing conversation across the country. I think I'm seeing so much more about Parkinson's out there since you guys have started these conversations. So I'm incredibly grateful for that, because we here in the Parkinson's community who do advocate do find that it is difficult to be heard.
Well, your stories matter, and everybody's stories matter, and we're happy to contribute to the dialogue. And it's a long time coming that Parkinson needs to get its due, and we need to be all talking about it for a lot of reasons.
I think that Parkinson's, being that it is, I've always said that, like, Parkinson's is ugly. It's ugly to look at. It's a horrible disease, and nobody really wants to look it in the face. So you have to kind of add a spoonful of sugar to it. And in having these real conversations, I think that adds the sugar to it, because they're seeing that this is official and it's real, and there's things out there that are in our environment and such that are threats to us, that we also are empowered, and there's things that we can do for our help prevent and mitigate this disease, which is wonderful.
I'm a big fan, everybody knows, of the Ending Parkinson's book. That was the first book that I bought after I got diagnosed with Parkinson's. What inspired you to write the Parkinson's Plan?
Because we're failing. The status quo is not working. Parkinson's is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. Today, 250 people will be diagnosed with the disease. In just the US alone, 100 Americans will die with the disease. The disease is now the 13th leading cause of death. There's been no therapeutic breakthrough this century other than perhaps exercise. Pesticides that we know likely contribute, if not cause the disease, are routinely sprayed on corn fields and soybean fields and cotton fields throughout the United States. Pesticides that we know in the lab damage dopamine producing nerve cells are still sprayed on golf courses. Last year, the NIH spent $250 million on Parkinson's research. Parkinson's affects as many people as HIV. HIV receives $3 billion, and we've seen what that has transformed that field. If you go through, only 9% of people with Parkinson's disease see specialists like Michael or me, and that's in the United States. And we spend 40%, 50% more on healthcare than any other nation in the world. If you look at every measure by which you would measure the health of the Parkinson's community, we're failing it. And Michael and I, in the opening chapter of the book, said in the introduction, we said we are failing the Parkinson's community. And Michael and I don't like to fail. We're pretty dogmatic and pretty determined guys. And we put forth a plan to, 1, prevent the disease, 2, learn why it begins, 3, amplify the voices of you, Esther, of you, Mel, of you, Chris, and everyone directly affected by the disease, and 4, navigate the new frontier of treatments. As Michael said, it's long overdue. And every time we delay, every time we don't take action, it just means more and more people are going to be affected by this terrible disease.
Yeah, that was kind of my frustration with the Parkinson's Plan book. I think it's been 6 years since that book came out, and it was such a call to action. And I feel like in a lot of ways that the community has not stepped up to support you in that call to action. And you've really built on that and done a lot of the heavy lifting to quantify it and, give us those steps. Obviously, the Parkinson's 25. I'm just curious how you came to that list?
We kept getting asked the question, what can we do? If I already have Parkinson's, what can I do to possibly slow the rate of progression? And we got asked that question over and over again. And I think Michael and I said, we better come up with some good answers. Otherwise, it's going to keep going because it's the right question to ask. And I think we've all seen how much exercise can change the course of people with Parkinson's. Anyone who's been in a rock steady boxing class has seen people who were struggling coming into the class and after some period of time are doing really well. We see in diabetes, we see people who are taking insulin for type 2 diabetes who can go back to not taking insulin. We see people with high blood pressure who change their diet and their exercise and they don't need to be on antihypertensives or on less. And we see smokers who stop smoking, we see their risk of their pulmonary function improve, the risk of heart disease and risk of stroke decrease. I think the same might be true with Parkinson's disease. And I think we certainly have been under investigating and I think perhaps even underselling the potential benefits of stopping exposure to these chemicals. In the course writing the book, I came across a study from Dr. Beata Ritz and colleagues at UCLA that show for people who already have Parkinson's who are exposed to pesticides have faster rates of progression on almost every domain that they measured. People who already have Parkinson's who are exposed to high levels of air pollution are more likely to be hospitalized. So we give you 25 things that can possibly slow your rate of progression of the disease and 25 actions your children, your grandchildren can take to reduce their risk of ever getting this terrible disease, because I increasingly think that the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. Clearly for people with YOPD, with young onset Parkinson's, they are planted early. Brian Grant, the former NBA basketball player, was exposed to chemicals at age 13. Michael J. Fox was part of a cluster of people who developed Parkinson's disease when he was part of a TV show, I think when he was 15. The Marines who served at Camp Lejeune were on average age were 20, and 34 years later, they had a 70% increased risk of Parkinson's. Air pollution studies suggest that misfolding of alpha-synuclein, the protein implicated in Parkinson's, begins in childhood. So we increasingly have good evidence that the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. So if you don't want your kids, if you don't want your grandkids to get this disease, we give you 25 recommendations to prevent that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to it. Thank you, Esther, for mentioning the Ending Parkinson Disease book. Came out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And actually the original name of the book was going to be called The Parkinson Pandemic. And that was before we knew there was another pandemic going, and publishers, it's a funny story, thought that was too, like too much, too long.
Yeah.
And then they thought, oh my gosh, we definitely should have that name, right? So they had the mistake on the name. But, fundamentally, it's not just that we're failing, we don't have a plan. And so when we proposed the Ending Parkinson, disease in 2020, we had Prevent, Advocate, Care, and Treat, the PACT, based on researching HIV, cancer, other disorders. How do we get it over the line? And then this beautiful thing happened, Esther. This beautiful thing happened. All of these people came out, and said, we are grassroots voices, and, not part of other organizations, not part of anything, just voices of people that needed to be heard. They started a group called the PD Avengers, which I think many of you are part of, www.pdavengers.org and or .com. And this group has been amazing. And then as the next book, the plan came out, Prevent, Advocate, Prevent, Amplify, Prevent, Learn, Amplify our voices, and develop a new care plan and care model and navigate toward new treatments. We realized we need a plan, and laying that plan out is our best hope at trying to create a vision. And so the Parkinson Disease Avengers, now they wrote to us, and we're so excited that they got over 10,000, members. And of course, I said to them not to rain on their parade. We need to add another 0 or 2 onto that, and we're still not where we need to be. So it's really important that this is a comprehensive plan that includes primary prevention, just like we have for heart disease, as part of our plan.
I think that every voice that you lend to education is necessary but we have to be saying the same thing. You know, these orgs that are out there are so fractured in what they specialize in that it's not lending enough credence to the message that we need help, you know, which is why we are on social media, and which is why we've connected. You know, a couple of years ago, I started using a hashtag called Parkinson's Looks Like Me, because I didn't feel like there was anything out there that accurately correlated with my experience with Parkinson's. Parkinson's Looks Like Me has over 50 million views on TikTok, and it has thousands and thousands of posts on social media. If we were to use something like that, it doesn't have to be that, but if we were to use something like that to correlate information where people could go and see what they can do for themselves, it would be so much more beneficial than going from group to group to group to group to group, because you don't know what to pick. Nobody knows anything about anything. So part of that, I think, really needs to be everybody coming together with one message and saying that one message.
Parkinson's Looks Like Me is exactly what we were trying to convey in the book. So the book is filled with people with young onset Parkinson's disease. The opening is 2 Air Force Academy graduates, 2 athletes, 2 people who became doctors who served their country, including in Afghanistan, became moms and were diagnosed in their 40s within a month of each other.
Yeah.
And we highlight that the face of Parkinson's has changed. It's not just old men who are getting the disease. Michael and his colleague, Melissa Armstrong, wrote a paper on the new face of Parkinson's. I forgot what the name of the article was, Michael.
Yeah.
Highlighting exactly that Parkinson's isn't just affecting old men. It's affecting everyone. And if you think about it, who are the faces of Parkinson's disease? The faces of Parkinson's disease are Michael J. Fox, Brian Grant, Davis Finney, Ali Signorelli, Esther, Mel, Chris, all of you guys, Sarah Whittingham. I think all of you have some things in common. 1, you're all young. 2, I don't think any of you have a family history of the disease. And 3, I don't think any of you have carry genetic cause or risk factor for the disease.
Correct.
So here it is. The most prominent people with Parkinson's disease do not have a family history of the disease, do not carry a genetic risk factor for the disease, and are getting diagnosed at a young age. Younger age than anyone described by Dr. Parkinson in the seminal description. Why is that? If we don't answer why Michael J. Fox, why Brian Grant, why Davis Finney, why Esther, why Mel, why Chris, why Sarah have Parkinson's disease, how in the world are we going to prevent and cure this disease? We need to take a step back, take some humility pills, including me, and say, listen, if you want to prevent, treat, or cure this disease, it's really helpful to know what its cause is. And the most prominent people with the disease, the people who are not only bearing the burden for themselves, but for millions of people around the world and have been doing so for 30 years, we should figure out what's causing their disease. When you figure out what causes the disease, whether it's hepatitis C, whether it's peptic ulcer disease, whether it's HIV, whether it's polio, you can take great actions to prevent, slow, and treat the disease. Our failure as a community, and it's on us, on Michael and me, to address this disease is because we've been unwilling to find, identify, and clearly articulate what is fueling the rise of the disease. It can't be aging for you guys, right? You're all young. It can't be genetics unless we missed it. And we have some great friends and colleagues who are great geneticists. I don't think Andy Singleton and Christine Klein and others have missed the major genetic causes of the disease. I think it's chemicals in our food, water, and air. And we continue to allow these chemicals in our food, water, and air to be sprayed on our golf courses, on kids' playgrounds, on sports fields, on farms, and we have the audacity to ask why Parkinson's disease is still growing.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's, my grandfather was diagnosed later. He was probably 68, 69, 70. Worked as a mechanic on the railroad. So we were all just assumed it's whatever solvent they use to, to clean the parts or whatever. Well, he passed, unfortunately, before I was diagnosed. And, growing up, we had a farm, we raised cattle, we planted corn, and I asked, my dad and uncle, I was like, hey, what did you all spray? And they, Parkland immediately
Mm.
was the answer because it worked.
Yeah.
So, and it worked well. So, I mean, going through that, I've had two different sets of genetic tests. None of the markers showed.
Same.
So it's either, there's another marker that we don't know about, or like you said, and I've told myself many, many times, and everybody else I know, it's environmental, right? I mean, just the exposures to everything in our food, in our water, in our air, in the soil.
Mhm.
It's challenging. I guess my idea is, or the question I'd like to know is, how do we get the world outside of the Parkinson's advocacy to take notice, right? Like where does the tipping point come into play?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, Chris, I'll just weigh in and say I agree with everything that you're saying. And when we dug in, as Esther pointed out in the Ending Parkinson's Disease book, we dug in again in the Parkinson Plan. So create a pact, create a plan. And if you study other diseases, everything from HIV to breast cancer to polio, to smoking, and its association with lung cancer, the history of all of this is that it takes too much time. And we see that we know when there are associations, and because of a lot of factors, not the least of which are, factors where, we have something called agnotology, which is, the willful spread of ignorance, right? Which companies do, to continue to make money. And we talk about that in the Parkinson Plan. And it's going to take the voices being larger. And as Ray and I dug into this, we spent a lot of time trying to be thoughtful and trying to like actually sit back in our chairs and understand, how did they get a tipping point, Chris, in HIV? How did they get a tipping point in breast cancer? How did they get a tipping point in lung cancer? And then the other thing Ray and I tried to understand is, not only how do you get to the tipping point, but how do you decrease the latency, the amount of time it takes you to get there, because there are a lot of people suffering. And when you look at the numbers, the Global Burden of Disease study funded by the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, showed us during Ending Parkinson's Disease that Esther brought up, that when Ray is the whiz at these things, and used to work for McKinsey and has a really good background in looking at these numbers. And when we crunched the numbers, we all agreed that there was going to be at least 12 million cases by 2035. There's already 12 million cases on the next, since that book has been written, Esther, Ending Parkinson's Disease, and now the new book. And so we're growing faster than Alzheimer's disease. Young people are getting it. So it can't just be a disease of aging. It's not the genetics, right? And all of these things. And you meet all these young people who don't have genes as well. And so the tipping point for HIV, the tipping point, for polio, was getting more voices on the grassroots. And when they sat in at the FDA and shut down the FDA, in a very peaceful way, when they went to Wall Street and they shut down Wall Street because they were charging too much for HIV cocktails. Listen, it's pennies on the dollar to have dopamine and to have dopamine pills. I mean, it's really cheap, cheaper than HIV drugs, yet we can get HIV drugs anywhere on the planet right now for people. And so our voices haven't been large enough. And when congressmen were voting against, this, they put a condom over Holmes, his house, and it said Holmes is deadlier than a virus, and he didn't vote against HIV again. And so they were more effective in their voices. And to get back to Esther's idea and to get back to the PD Avengers, I'm not disappointed that we didn't get as many people, and now we're just crusting, 10,000 on that group, and we have a lot of other groups. We've got to harmonize our voices and really be heard. And that means it has to be a community disease, and we've got to all, figure out how to really elevate our voices.
Yeah, and Mel and I have had this discussion before, as far as a little bit different approach that I have. And I had this conversation with Ray when he was kind enough to come here to El Paso and Ciudad Juarez with me. As far as I think it's Dr. Bloom that made the comment about people with Parkinson's being too nice. And I 100% feel that in my bones. I don't think we have to be mean or unkind, but I do feel like there's something about people with Parkinson's specifically that they are just, by and large, some of the nicest people that I've ever met in my life. And I love that. I think I always call it like the gift of Parkinson's is the people. But I am 100% fueled by frustration and a sense of urgency because of this disease. And I don't see it in the general population, unfortunately. And Ray said something so powerful to me when we were having lunch that day, which is, it starts with you, Esther. And it's not me personally, like I'm not that special, but like that whole concept of like each and every single one of us has that voice and is that person. And to me, that's the beauty of social media, right? Yeah. I mean, Allie, me, Mel, Chris, Jimmy Choi, who, Larry Gifford, whoever that is, who we are as individuals is only, it's not as important as how that message gets out there and how it spreads. And the more of us there are voicing our stories, I think that's going to grow exponentially. But I do think we have to sort of learn, especially from HIV, but also from other disease states like chronic kidney disease, that has just like changed the game over the years. Even MS, they've just put it together. But I do feel like we are at that tipping point as an advocacy community with PD Avengers and other organizations, of course, specifically PMD Alliance and YOPN, because they have been just bringing us together in a completely grassroots way that I love, to make that real change right now, because it's like this perfect storm, unfortunately, of all of the things kind of coming together, the data that we need, and the attention that your book has brought. And not just in the Parkinson's community, but in the greater community. Most of the people that I've given your book to do not have Parkinson's, but nobody wants Parkinson's. Nobody wants any of these conditions. And so anytime we talk about prevention, what was that statistic you gave, Ray, about the money that's allocated to prevention?
It's, with more money spent on homes in New York City every day, buying a single home in New York City, than we spend as a society on trying to prevent the disease.
I believe it. Yeah.
So we just need good old fashioned Parky rage.
Yeah, well, I would like to amplify and highlight something that Esther said, that, so there's been some moments since the book came out, and, before we did our first, kind of launch event at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., we felt, as we began visiting with people, we felt a palpable difference in. Ray and I have been out on the road. I've been the medical director and advisor for the Parkinson Foundation for years and run the Parkinson Helpline. I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of continents, and so has Ray. But there was a difference this time. And the difference was, getting back to what you said, Chris, is there's a little anger there. There's a little more engagement than we saw, a lot more engagement, and maybe a lot more anger and a lot more, I'm irritated, like by this. We need to get involved. And then something else that Esther said really struck me, and it's been true, in that I keep meeting people who have read this book who don't have Parkinson's disease, and are sharing things with Ray and I, and it's been actually remarkable. Even I had somebody over at the house who was visiting, and their mother's does something completely different, read the book, and it's remarkable, and causing people to think about it, about this generation and the next. And I think that can be really powerful to helping us to create a movement, because it shouldn't be a book. This is a movement.
Yes.
And just one thing on the movement, it's not just you, right? So when I see people with Parkinson's, I get pissed off. When I see people with young onset Parkinson's, I think you've been robbed, right? You've been robbed of your livelihood. You've been robbed of your independence. You've been robbed of your time. You've been robbed of your money. And these robberies are because of chemicals in our food, water, and air in the vast majority of cases. But it's not just Parkinson's. These same chemicals are implicated in intellectual disabilities and in autism. You know, I think a couple days after I visited Esther in El Paso, we saw Juan Reyes in San Antonio. It turns out that veterans are 2 to 10 times higher, I'm told, risk of getting ALS. It's not just ALS, it's Alzheimer's disease. Air pollution is not just linked to Parkinson's, but it's linked to Alzheimer's disease. There are reasons why 1 in 31 8-year-old American children are getting autism. There are reasons why ALS and brain cancer are increasingly common. There are reasons why 1 in 3 of us who aspire to live to 85 will develop Alzheimer's disease. And I think increasingly that these are chemicals in our food, water, air. Not all, there are huge genetic causes to many of these diseases, but for a large portion of this is preventable. These diseases would not be rising. Brain diseases would not be the leading source of disability in the world if there weren't environmental factors contributing to their rise. So why not form a broader union with the ALS community, with the autism community, with moms who are tired of pesticides being sprayed on their kids' playgrounds and schools, with moms who are tired of pesticides being found in their kids' cereal, and make a voice that our voice is heard. We have an opportunity. There is a political climate that identifies that chemicals are contributing to these chronic diseases in kids and adults. We should tap into it and guide it into a direction that's actually constructive instead of destructive.
As a mom with Parkinson's who has an autistic child, and my children went to school across the street from a dry cleaner, down the street from a golf course, surrounded by 5 Superfund sites, one of which, was redug a second time, and 82 million pounds of soil were removed, and it's still considered a level 4 contamination. So that is provocative to me. And then the second thing is, then who's responsible? But that's a bigger question. Who's responsible for that? Who's going to take responsibility? Who's going to own up and say, you know what, we need to clean this up? And I don't think it's anyone. I think it's probably going to end up being everyone, because there's that. It just has to be. People can't be complacent with things like this when in New York State, apartment buildings are polluted, air is polluted, water is polluted. My grandfather, who had Parkinson's disease, worked for IBM. IBM in the 70s polluted the Dutchess River with TCE and was charged with cleaning it up. But how well did they clean it up in the 70s? So that stuff's still sitting out there, and that's where we played, and that's where we hung out, and that's where all our friends were. So it's around. It's still around. It's prevalent everywhere. That's the thing that people don't realize. Like, Parkinson's is the boogeyman. It's everywhere.
I had a conversation with Mel, actually right after Ray left El Paso that weekend. I took my son to where I take my son every weekend, which is the soccer field of a newly laid bunch of sod in the middle of a desert that has no reason even having sod. And I immediately thought to myself, like, how do I do this? And I think that's where we're at. As I know that's where, as a community, but also as me as a mom, it's just like, where do we start? How do I even start to, where do I go to start raising my voice for something? How can I in good conscience sit there and watch my kid not only be in what I'm sure is heavily chemically treated grass, but then as he has grown up in the soccer field, now they do headers, they call them. And fortunately, he doesn't play a position that requires that a lot. But every time I see a ball going towards my kid's head, I'm just like, what am I doing? So can you speak to the research on that and maybe some steps and takeaways of what we can do about it?
So there are 2 women, Brandy Chastain, Kim Akers from the gold medal winning U.S. women's soccer team who have been working to highlight the dangers of heading a soccer ball. I think Kim Maker said, maybe the idea of heading a ball that's coming down from 50 feet in the air may not be the wisest idea. And there are 3 studies in Italy, Spain, and Scotland that have linked soccer playing, for example, to ALS. No one's determined why. My hypothesis, I could be wrong, is that it's a combination of head trauma and exposure to the pesticides on the soccer field that are either absorbed in through the skin and or inhaled and through the nose. And many of the pesticides used on sports fields in the lab damage dopamine producing nerve cells. And so what can people do? Well, all of us can contact our school and say, are you spraying pesticides on kids' playgrounds and schools? And if so, can we please stop or use less toxic ones or use less? That's what Robin Sewell, a mom, did in Southern California. And because of that, California has a Healthy Schools Act that bans the use of most toxic pesticides on kids' schools and playgrounds and requires that parents be notified in writing in advance of the use of pesticides on their kids' schools and playgrounds. There is a model that could be readily replicated for every state in the union and every community. It doesn't have to be a state level. It could be, I was in the suburb of Rochester where the Henrietta town supervisor, upper middle class neighborhood in Rochester, said I haven't signed a single purchase order for pesticides, not to be used on the golf courses, not to be used on the medians, not to be used on playgrounds. These are all within our realm of action that we can take. And then there are things on the societal level that we can do. The EPA administrator is Lee Zeldin. He comes from Long Island, which was contaminated with this trichloroethylene, this degreasing and drying clean chemical. We can all email the administrator of Zeldin. His email is zeldin.lee at epa.gov, zeldin.lee at epa.gov. Dear Administrator Zeldin, thank you for your service. Please ban paraquat, please ban chlorpyrifos, so we can prevent people from getting Parkinson's disease and intellectual disabilities.
Yeah.
I mean, if 1 million people made their voices heard in the Parkinson's community and we're joined by 3% of American families that are caring for a child with autism, we'll quickly make a headway on both these terrible toxicants.
I agree.
I think also, you think about the compounding risk of things. So we know head injury also increases the risk of Parkinson's. And, and so, we put people in harm's way. There's we talk about this in the Parkinson 25, a higher number of folks who are veterans, okay, and they get head injuries, for defending us and doing things for our country. And we don't protect them at home, and so when you start adding the risk factors together, it becomes a compound effect. And so, even when you talk about your kid going to the soccer fields, and you start thinking about this, well, they spray the pesticides on the fields, right? And they're hitting the ball, they're getting concussions, they're banging into each other. And so we really do, I think, for the next generation, have to be thinking through the consequences of brain health and risk for degenerative disease. And I think the discussion, and I think one of the reasons why the book captured the attention of people who don't have Parkinson's is just that we need to be thinking in a different way. And there may be some things that are unnecessary, to do. And I also want to bring up something I think it's important that we talk about, and that's that, the Industrial Revolution is an important part of why we saw these changes in our environment. And it wasn't like people did it on purpose, right? And so we were trying to have factories, trying to create jobs, trying to be more efficient. We needed to create pesticides. Side means killer, not because we were trying to kill ourselves by consuming the pesticides, but because we were trying to create a better food supply for people. The factories inadvertently created jobs, but also created pollution in the air and polluted our waters. And it wasn't intentional, but I think we have to come to some sort of reasonable, rational understanding of what happened and what we need to do. And we need to clean it up. And by cleaning it up, we can reduce diseases. And Ray knows that I love the quote in the book about Hippocrates and about how all diseases have causes, and diseases are a product of a sum of all of our daily sins. And so I think if we start thinking in that way, then we also have a great message for the next generation. And as you're trying to recruit more and more people onto this bus, and we need to bring people on who don't have Parkinson's as well, and families who don't have Parkinson's. And I think it's a community. Nobody in any community that I've met anybody yet who doesn't know somebody with Parkinson's or have somebody with Parkinson in their family. And for too long, we've ignored people who came to us in our clinics and said, hey, I have Parkinson, and the guy across the street has Parkinson, and the guy on the next block has Parkinson, and like this seems like too much. And we're all like, nah, that must just be a coincidence, right? And then we start learning about, golf courses, pesticides, water, air, other things, and we start to think, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't such a coincidence. So I think these are really important aspects, but it's really going to take an effort from the base of people to create a voice. And getting back to what Chris said, I think it is okay to get angry, and I think it's time we get angry and irritated. Look, if you look at the history of HIV, when they changed things, they got pissed off. They got really pissed off. And maybe it's time for us to get a little more pissed off and start to move this field.
I can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Pivoting to another part of your book that I am pissed off about, which is the access and quality of care that those of us with Parkinson's receive
Yes.
in our so-called healthcare system. And another thing that Mel and I often go back and forth about, which is the graphic from this study that has to do with the patient as the son, right? So the interdisciplinary care model that has us as the son, and we're quite snarky about it because we definitely do not feel like the sun. We feel like we're, what is it, Pluto, that we're not even sure is a planet out here, like rotating.
Is the planet, was the planet.
Like we could but like there I was in surgery getting my DBS and having a panic attack, and they were having a meeting because it was early in the morning. So one of the fellows came up and she says, "You look very, very nervous. Would you like me to close this curtain for you?" And I said, "Well, I really would like something for this anxiety," which for me makes me feel uncomfortable because I don't like to ask for drugs because I don't want to look like I need drugs. So she said, "Oh yeah, sure. We'll get you something right away as soon as this meeting is over. So did you want me to close the curtain?" And I said, "No, leave it open."
Yeah.
So then I just cried during their meeting
Yeah.
to make them very uncomfortable because I was not the son that day. And that quote reverberated because that is what it needs to be. And I absolutely agree, but it's not rolling out into these hospitals and things like that. Like I taped a Cinemet underneath my boots and my little ugly socks because I was afraid that I for the second time I was not going to get my medication. So
I mean, it's not funny, but it is sort of
yeah.
But I think Mel, getting to the heart of what we've learned or not learned. For a number of years, I ran a web-based, almost like a DOS 1.0. It started off almost like a Reddit thing where people would write in called Ask the Doctor for decades and answer their questions. And I answered thousands and thousands of these questions, and it became clear to me early in my career that we really were not, the patient is the son. And when we came to University of Florida, Kelly Foote and I, who is a neurosurgeon, by the way, we're considered broken records. Like here, if you come on the UF campus, they're like, "Oh, Okun's going to talk about the sun." The sun always comes up as but I think the point is that to get the word out, we've got to get the word out, and we've got to have a plan, and we've got to say, this is our plan, and this is what we know, this is the data, this is how it works. And so when we think about the person with disease is the son, it wasn't enough. And so the thing that was different about this book is, Ray and I, we would challenge each other while we were writing the book. It took us 2 years to write and rewrite, through this. And one of the concepts that had to be challenged was the person with disease is the son is not enough. And so, putting Mercury there, which is the caregiver and care partners, sometimes it gets hot. Mercury is the closest to the sun, but also Mercury is the communication, right? God of communication, right? Back and forth. Putting in all the interdisciplinary specialists and the people with Parkinson as the other planets and all the things. But it's not just, in Parkinson, it isn't just getting parking and seeing one specialist. Being able to bring people in and out as you need them with mental health, with other things. We're doing that well in other diseases like cancer and HIV. We're not doing it well on Parkinson, including Pluto in the actual orbit to show that, 25 to 50% of people are still hiding their diagnosis. And there's so much stigma and so much, and that has to be considered. It's unacceptable, and we shouldn't be accepting that as the answer. And then we have the satellites, which are all of mission control, which are all these new things like these rings and watches and everything. I've got 1 million of them on me right now. And to help us to monitor, help us to go in, take care to the home for people. Some people can't get to the offices, and we ask that in the United States that the regulations for COVID be maintained for telehealth. And you see they keep getting rolled back and back and back. And that was part of our red card campaign, Esther, back from the Ending Parkinson Disease book, because we were kind of warning, portending, like, if you don't pay attention, this is going to be a temporary thing. And that's exactly what's happening now. And then the asteroid field, which is one of Ray and I's favorite stories in the book, which is the Star Wars analogy with Chewbacca and Han Solo. By the way, Han Solo is in a Netflix, or I don't know if it's Netflix, but in a show where he's a shrink, right? And Parkinson's, right? So there's Han Solo who ends up having Parkinson in this thing, right? And Chewbacca, and they're asking themselves, what are the odds of making it through this asteroid field? And it's one in an amazingly high number. And the point of that story is it's hard enough to get parking and see one specialist. You're not the son if you don't get the mental health when you need it. You're not the son if you don't get the PT and the OT and the speech when you need it. You're not the son when you need a social worker, a genetics counselor, or nutritionist. And so we're not doing this. So the chances of coming through in a chronic disease like this, we've done better in some cancers. We've done better in HIV. We need to do better in Parkinson. We can do better. How are we going to do better, Mel? We're going to move those chess pieces differently. So that means we've got to roll out a different plan, and we've got to do our homework and get people to understand that as like we begin to lobby and try to bring people on the board, that we need them to understand that this has to be done differently. It has to be done like we've done it for other diseases, because this is a chronic disease that is more complex than any other disease in medicine. And we need to recognize that and appropriately move our chess pieces, which, back to I hate to be negative because I'm a positive person, but back to Dr. Dorsey, he said it at the very beginning, why'd you write the book? Because we are failing, and Ray and I give ourselves Fs. We've been in the field for a long time, and we need to do better.
So I have to ask you though, are you getting blowback from your own community? I mean, how has your message been received within the neuroscience space?
So far, I would say I do think that there are people that are very much, like, this is too far in terms of the environmental things that you're talking about. But the dialogue is out there, and I personally, and Ray can comment, I don't fear the dialogue at all. I think it's unacceptable that if we do a clinical trial and we decide we're going to randomize 2 groups to get a therapy, we have to outline it. We have to tell people what we're doing. We have to prove what the safety, what the efficacy, and then we put all these chemicals into the environment. And there's nothing that those people are held to keep our population, this generation, the next generation, safe.
Yes.
There's no way we can do a clinical trial. So they can keep saying, oh, this is we can't do the clinical trial. Do you know what the clinical trial would be? It would be, we give half of the people Chris paraquat and we give half of the people not paraquat and we see what happens. We can't do that. That's not ethical, right? And so the answer is we have to hold them to a higher standard. They have to prove it to us that these things are safe. They don't go into the mitochondria. They don't cause diseases and contribute to diseases and risk of diseases. And the only way that we're going to get there is by having the courage to stand up and say, we're going to take these things out. A lot of them are unnecessary, if not all of them are unnecessary, can be replaced by other things. And we are going to take the long-term investment and we're going to push back and change things. And so certainly, Esther, Ray and I have gotten plenty of pushback from our colleagues saying, you've gone too far, in the message, but we would push back and say, you haven't gone far enough, so, and at some point you have to stand up for, for what you believe in. So let's do the experiment. If we're wrong, we're wrong. But I think it's time that we move forward. There's sufficient proof that's more than just a paper here and a paper there. There's the drip, drip, drip into a huge flood of data that's out there. So I don't know. What do you think, Ray? Are you getting pushback from colleagues?
So how do you know if you're making progress? One way you know you're making progress is you encounter resistance. And so we've been encountering resistance, and that's good, and that's great. So in 2020, Michael and I wrote a book saying that Parkinson's disease was largely a man-made disease. Michael and Boss will remember they weren't so sure. And so I worked on them. But look at what's happened since then. Since then, we've had 2 large studies that have demonstrated that only 13% of Americans with Parkinson's disease carry a genetic risk factor or cause for the disease. We've had another study that showed that 80% of people with young onset Parkinson's disease, 80% of people with onset before age 50 do not carry any known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. Same study showed that onset before age 30, 70% do not carry any known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. Since the book came out, the number of people with Parkinson's disease is now twice as many as we highlighted in the book, higher than any projection than Michael, Boss, and I have ever put out. Since the book came out, living near a golf course has been associated with a doubling of the risk of disease. Since the first book came out, air pollution has been increasingly identified as a risk factor for the disease. Since the book has come out, studies showing that living near a trichloroethylene emitting site is associated with an increased risk of developing the disease. In short, I think we've understated it. People have been saying that we're overstating it. If you look at the evidence, everything that we have said, studies have come out and said we have not gone far enough. Even since our second book, Parkinson's Plan, has come out, I'm increasingly concerned about a pesticide called chlorpyrifos. My colleague at Columbia University showed that this pesticide was sprayed inside the homes in New York City to kill insects. Women who gave birth to children, that pesticide was found in their umbilical cord blood. The higher the level that the pesticide in the umbilical cord blood of the children, the lower the IQ at 3, 5, and 7. And then last month in the journal for which Michael's an associate editor, showed that those children exposed to a pesticide when they were in utero, in their mother's womb, had structural brain abnormalities on their MRIs at ages between 6 and 15 and slowed motor function. I think they're setting the seeds for future cases of Parkinson's. So almost everything that Michael and I have written in both these 2 books has proved to be understated, and the evidence of the environmental contributions and the preventable nature of Parkinson's disease has only increased.
Agreed. I mean, it stands to reason it's been banned in 70 different countries. So, and here we are in the US going, this is fine. Like, it needs to go.
And we're allowing pesticide. The EPA banned chlorpyrifos in 2021. The manufacturer sued, and now the EPA is allowing a pesticide that's estimated to cost 26 million American children, 17 million IQ points, 17 million IQ points for a pesticide, and is found, according to one study, is allowed to be now sprayed on apples.
My youngest daughter was diagnosed with autism this year. She has an IQ of 52. Mine is 148. So her dad is dumb. So, there's a learning curve. However, having a child with an IQ of 52 is incredibly challenging. So then, that needs to be spoken to as well. And I'll tell you what, that kid is the biggest blessing that I've ever had in my life, because she's taught me so many things. And the autistic mind is fascinating, but it could be easier as a single parent. I haven't been a single parent since conception. And now I'm a single parent of an autistic child who will probably live with me most of her life, because she doesn't understand time, and she doesn't understand money, and she doesn't understand numbers, and I know there's a functional IQ and things like that, and I don't really worry about it. But she's exactly an example of that. We grew up in New York State, there's huge apple farms in New York. There's we lived by Stewart Air Force Base. We lived near Nepera. We lived near the Orange County landfill. All these places are super fun sites. We were surrounded by pollution, and now it has affected my entire life. And here I am with Parkinson's, trying to raise this child that is sometimes challenging, so where do you start?
And that's a really good question, Mel, that you ask, is where do you suggest we start?
Everyone listening can join the PD Avengers, now 10,000 members strong, founded by people with YOPD, led by people with YOPD, pdavengers.com. It takes 30 seconds to join. You don't have to have Parkinson's. Your child, your friend, your neighbor, your cousin, your dentist can all join the thing, because that makes the voices of people with Parkinson's amplify. What can you do in your community? We can get rid of pesticides on our kids' schools and playgrounds. If you live near a golf course, you can ask them to let you know, give you the courtesy of knowing when they're going to spray, ask them to spray less, to use less toxic pesticides. And at a societal level, we can ban the chemicals, paraquat, chlorpyrifos, that we know are doing that. zeldin.lee@epa.gov. Send an email today. Contact your congressman or your representative. And then we need to get the national plan, the advisory council for the national plan to end Parkinson's Act in place. It's supposed to, by law, my understanding is being placed by the end of the year. That's 2 months away. It needs to get in place. So the sooner it gets in place, the sooner we develop a federal plan to prevent, slow, treat, and cure Parkinson's disease. These are all things we can do as individuals, in our community, and in our society.
Thank you so much for your time and your tireless efforts for all of us. And we look forward to, if amplifying our own voices and yours as well, because you're part of this community, a very, very important part of this community. And we thank you so much for that. And I do want to take a minute to remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by PMD Alliance. And we love them because they are so great about listening to us and amplifying the patient voice themselves. But this podcast costs money, and we would really, really appreciate it as people go into the holidays, especially when you're sitting down to decide where you're going to donate your money to for the next year. You considered giving some to PMD Alliance. I'm going to go ahead and probably start like a monthly thing in the next year, because I'm the worst about remembering when and who I'm donating to. And also because YOPN, Young Onset Parkinson's Network, which is where we all got our start, is a part of the PMD Alliance family now. So make sure that everybody goes to their new and improved website, which is even better than ever, pmdalliance.org. All the YOPN information and notifications is housed there. And for the people that don't watch this live, they can get recordings of everything we do and links to our podcast, which we hope people will subscribe to. Hit subscribe and get notifications, because I have heard it from the powers that be that it's going to be bigger and better in 2026, like this movement that we're all building together. And I'm super excited to be a part of.
Thank you for having us, and it's been a pleasure. And everybody, let's get on the movement.
Let's be the generation that ends Parkinson's.
Parky rage.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Esther. Thank you,
Thanks,
Mel.
y'all.
Thank you, PMD.
Thanks for tuning in to the Living Well Starts Here vodcast with Young Onset Parkinson's Network.